The veteran's claws scraped lightly against the polished metal of the observation deck as he surveyed the holographic map of the Sol system. Decades of campaigns had taught him that victory depended not only on firepower but on understanding the opponent, and the humans, he warned, were the type of opponent the Empire had never faced. His voice, low and steady, carried the weight of experience across the council chamber. He spoke of soldiers who did not flee when outnumbered, of warriors who adapted faster than any algorithm, and of tactics that seemed chaotic but concealed a terrifying logic. He detailed their resilience, the way they turned scarcity into innovation, and how their small victories compounded into strategic dominance over time. Every word was measured, rooted in years of observation and first-hand encounters with humans in skirmishes on distant outposts, their methods misunderstood or underestimated by previous alien commanders. The Empire's leaders leaned back in their chairs, dismissing his warnings with the kind of arrogance born from centuries of uncontested conquest. They mocked the very notion that Earth could pose a credible threat, their laughter echoing off the chamber walls. The veteran did not flinch. He had seen arrogance before. It always preceded disaster. He reminded them that humans had survived environments that would have destroyed entire regiments of other species. They endured extremes of temperature, famine, and disease without faltering, their societies often hardened by necessity and conflict. He emphasized that what humans lacked in technological parity, they more than compensated with creativity, cunning, and an instinctive understanding of their world and the chaos it produced. He explained how humans formed bonds in ways the Empire could not comprehend, how trust and loyalty among their soldiers translated into movements that were coordinated, unpredictable, and devastatingly effective. He described skirmishes where humans feigned weakness, drawing superior forces into traps, turning their own technological advantages against them with nothing more than improvised weapons and strategic patience. Every engagement he recounted revealed a pattern. The humans did not fight for glory or conquest, they fought to survive, and in surviving, they evolved. The veteran warned that their motivation was neither fear nor ambition but a persistent refusal to accept defeat, a quality that could not be measured or predicted. The Council remained unconvinced, confident in their fleet's superior firepower and in the Empire's doctrine of overwhelming force. They pointed to the human fleet as scattered, small, and poorly equipped, failing to see that these very limitations made them dangerous. The veteran shook his head, detailing how humans leveraged what they had with a precision that the Empire's simulations could not replicate. He spoke of ambushes in urban environments, of logistical sabotage, of communications interference that seemed primitive but was terrifyingly effective. The aliens laughed again, unable to reconcile the image of disorganized humans with the veteran's insistence that these soldiers were a threat. As he concluded, the veteran leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room. "You mistake their silence for surrender," he said quietly, almost to himself, though everyone heard. "You mistake their retreat for fear. You mistake their numbers for weakness. They do not fight as we fight, and that is why you will never anticipate them." He let the statement hang, knowing the laughter around him would not last once humans proved him right. The council murmured, some uncomfortable but unwilling to admit doubt. The veteran turned back to the map, fingers tracing the orbits of human colonies, knowing that every ignored warning was a step closer to disaster. He had fought wars across galaxies, witnessed empires crumble from arrogance, and he recognized the same pattern forming here. Humans were not a threat to be feared in the conventional sense. They were a force that could not be measured, constrained, or dismissed. The Empire would learn that lesson the hard way, and when it did, the veteran's words would echo long after the laughter had died. The Empire's fleet arrived in the Sol system with the confidence of those who had never known failure. Thousands of ships glided through the void in perfect formation, their engines humming in unison, reflecting the belief that superior technology guaranteed swift victory. The veteran watched silently, noting the precision but sensing the blind spot that would cost them dearly. From orbit, the human defenses appeared minimal: scattered satellites, small military outposts, and hastily organized fleets that seemed more symbolic than threatening. The alien commanders smirked, interpreting the lack of coordinated resistance as fear or incompetence. They assumed a swift campaign, one that would require little effort beyond the application of overwhelming force. Initial probes and reconnaissance yielded data that reinforced their assumptions. Human forces were small, decentralized, and appeared untrained. Civilian infrastructure remained largely intact, and the fleets in orbit seemed to avoid confrontation. The Empire dismissed this as hesitation, a temporary lapse before humans realized their folly. On the ground, scouts reported abandoned cities and fortifications, giving the impression of a population ready to yield. Yet the veteran noticed patterns others ignored. The humans' movements were deliberate, retreating not out of fear but to reorganize. Their withdrawals were strategic, drawing invaders into areas where terrain and environment favored the defenders. Every seemingly chaotic decision had a hidden logic, one that the Empire's sensors and simulations could not interpret. The first skirmishes revealed the beginning of the humans' unconventional tactics. Outposts designed for defense collapsed under surprise attacks, yet soldiers who survived those attacks reappeared elsewhere, striking at weak points the Empire had assumed were secure. Ambushes erupted in forests, deserts, and urban streets, using improvised weapons alongside remnants of captured technology. The veteran's warnings echoed in his mind as alien officers struggled to adapt. Humans refused the conventional rules of engagement, exploiting gaps in the Empire's doctrine. They hid in plain sight, repurposed civilian machinery as weapons, and coordinated attacks without centralized command. Every encounter left the Empire uncertain, their confidence eroding with every unexpected maneuver. In orbital space, human pilots engaged with an audacity that defied logic. Small, seemingly fragile ships darted between massive warships, exploiting blind spots and targeting systems. They ignored conventional formations, taking calculated risks that the Empire considered suicidal. Each victory, however minor, carried a psychological weight far greater than its strategic value. The veteran observed that humans measured success differently. They valued survival, adaptation, and the ability to impose incremental losses on a superior foe. It was not reckless bravery but a deep understanding of what mattered most in a fight. The Empire's analysts struggled to interpret these actions. Calculations assumed fear, discipline, and adherence to patterns, none of which the humans displayed. Retreats were not defeats, skirmishes were not mere chaos. The humans learned from every strike, adapting their strategies in ways that artificial intelligence could not predict. Even communication failures became tools, as misinformation and improvisation spread confusion among alien ranks. The veteran understood that these early engagements were more than defense. They were lessons, practice, and preparation for the battles to come. Despite mounting evidence, the Empire's leadership refused to adjust their assumptions. They mocked the humans' scattered defenses, confident that firepower would compensate for any irregularity. The veteran shook his head, knowing that confidence rooted in misunderstanding was more dangerous than any human weapon. He foresaw a campaign that would drag on, not because of human technology, but because of human will. What seemed like weakness was actually strategy. What appeared as disorganization was preparation. The first encounter would not be decisive. It would be the beginning of a confrontation that the Empire had never faced and could not yet comprehend. Humans were not merely resisting, they were teaching, adapting, and preparing to prove the veteran right. The first true shock came when the Empire realized that human endurance was beyond prediction. Engagements that should have lasted hours stretched into days, with human soldiers refusing to yield even after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate other species. Reports filtered in of squads trapped behind enemy lines, cut off from supply chains, yet continuing operations with improvised rations and scavenged ammunition. Captured humans offered no useful intelligence, their silence deliberate and impenetrable. Even under interrogation, they revealed nothing beyond defiance, and the interrogators quickly learned that fear, pain, or threat of death had no influence on these soldiers. They did not break. They adapted. They continued to fight as if injury were a minor inconvenience, and every act of resistance amplified their reputation. Alien commanders began to notice patterns that had previously gone unexamined. Humans displayed an uncanny ability to predict the movement of superior forces, not through computation but instinct, intuition honed over centuries of survival. Small teams anticipated reinforcements, set traps, and exploited weaknesses before they became apparent. The veterans' warnings echoed in the corridors of command as casualties mounted. Humans did not engage in open warfare with the intent to conquer or die for glory. They engaged to endure, to delay, to force the enemy into exhaustion. Every ambush, every counterattack, revealed a culture of combat that valued learning, adaptation, and survival above all else. The Empire's algorithms, designed to anticipate strategy through logic and probability, failed repeatedly because humans did not conform to any predictable pattern. The psychological impact on alien troops was immediate. Initial overconfidence gave way to unease, then fear. Units that once advanced boldly found themselves wary, hesitant, second-guessing every move. The humans' resilience was compounded by their ingenuity. Weapons that appeared obsolete became lethal when combined with clever tactics. Siege engines were sabotaged and repurposed, supply lines severed, and communication networks disrupted without ever fully exposing the human's position. Each success by a small human contingent forced recalibration of the Empire's plans, consuming time and resources. What the Empire had assumed would be a demonstration of superiority had instead become a lesson in unpredictability and efficiency. Cultural differences amplified the shock. Humans valued memory, history, and shared experience. They fought not only for themselves but for the stories of those who had come before, for communities that demanded survival, for the inheritance of their species. Loss did not diminish them, it strengthened them. A destroyed outpost would produce survivors who returned smarter, faster, and more determined. Each setback was internalized, analyzed, and transformed into strategy. The veteran had warned that humans measured victory differently, and now the Empire was forced to confront the truth. These were not conventional soldiers. They were adaptive, relentless, and unconstrained by fear. The veteran observed alien morale unraveling. Officers who had dismissed Earth as a minor threat now found themselves second-guessing every plan. Calculations failed to account for human persistence, and strategies based on intimidation collapsed when confronted by stoic defiance. Humans did not flee. Humans did not surrender. Even when technologically outmatched, they inflicted losses that were disproportionately high. In every engagement, the gap between expectation and reality widened, exposing the Empire's assumptions as arrogance. By the time the first major counteroffensives were launched, it was clear that the veterans' warnings were not exaggeration or paranoia. The humans' capacity to endure, adapt, and retaliate had transformed the campaign into a slow attritional nightmare. The Empire faced a foe whose greatest weapon was not technology or numbers, but an unyielding spirit that refused to submit, a spirit that would continue to learn, adapt, and strike long after the Empire assumed victory was assured. The veterans' cautionary voice had become prophecy, and every failure of the Empire to heed it brought them closer to an outcome they had never anticipated. The Empire's failures were no longer the result of miscalculation alone. They were the consequence of misunderstanding the essence of humanity. As human forces transitioned from defense to calculated counteroffensive, the aliens discovered the limits of their own doctrine. Standard formations crumbled under unpredictable maneuvers. Siege protocols failed when the humans refused to meet expectations of retreat or surrender. Every algorithm designed to anticipate human behavior was rendered useless, every tactical assumption challenged. The veteran watched silently, recognizing the pattern he had warned them about. Humans did not follow logic imposed from outside. They created their own logic within chaos. Humans began repurposing alien technology almost instantly, converting captured drones into reconnaissance units, retrofitting weapons for unconventional ambushes, and exploiting the Empire's own communication networks to misdirect fleets. It was not raw intelligence alone but rapid iteration under pressure that made these actions formidable. The aliens had relied on superiority in speed, firepower, and coordination, yet the humans turned scarcity into advantage, improvising in ways no simulator had predicted. Every adaptation carried a lesson, every mistake a calculated improvement, and the Empire had no mechanism to counter the cumulative effect of such relentless evolution. The psychological dimension of human warfare became increasingly apparent. Soldiers did not act out of hatred for the alien invaders, nor out of blind loyalty to command. They fought for survival, for memory, for a shared culture. Each casualty became a catalyst, intensifying the resolve of those who remained. Entire units rebuilt in secrecy, learning from what the enemy assumed were failures. Loss did not weaken them, it sharpened them. Commands intended to instill fear produced the opposite: defiance, ingenuity, and the kind of strategic patience that left alien leaders frustrated, bewildered, and increasingly desperate. The veterans' observations extended to the aliens' own forces. Discipline and hierarchy, once strengths, became vulnerabilities. Humans exploited predictability at every level, creating diversions that immobilized fleets, striking at command centers with minimal exposure, and forcing the Empire into reactionary behavior. They fought not to destroy indiscriminately but to achieve precise objectives with maximum effect. Each operation was a demonstration of ingenuity fused with persistence, revealing the fundamental truth the Empire had ignored. Humans were not merely fighters. They were thinkers, learners, and survivors in a system built for obedience and repetition. Even communication proved a weapon. Humans broadcast messages and misinformation simultaneously, leaving the aliens scrambling to distinguish strategy from ruse. Propaganda was unnecessary. Mere presence, resilience, and adaptation instilled fear. The Empire struggled to maintain morale as casualty reports mounted and operations faltered. Experienced officers questioned the efficacy of every plan, realizing too late that brute strength and technology could not substitute for insight into human behavior. In every encounter, humans revealed layers of strategy that were invisible until confronted directly, a combination of instinct, memory, and situational awareness that confounded even the most sophisticated systems. The veteran knew that humans measured victory differently. Where the Empire saw surrender as a prerequisite for success, humans treated resistance itself as triumph. Retreats were tactical, losses were instructive, and every small success accumulated into a force disproportionate to its apparent scale. Alien forces could not predict how far humans would go, how much they could endure, or how effectively they would transform adversity into advantage. What appeared as chaos from a distance was in fact methodical adaptation, each movement contributing to a larger strategy that unfolded beyond alien comprehension. By the time the first true human offensives began, the Empire understood that it had underestimated not the weaponry of Earth, but the people themselves. Humans were not predictable, not fragile, and not limited by fear. They were a force of constant evolution, combining intellect, endurance, and unyielding will. Every misstep by the Empire reinforced the lesson the veteran had delivered. Humans could not be measured by conventional metrics. They were not just soldiers. They were embodiments of persistence, cunning, and the unbreakable instinct to survive. The Empire faced more than combat. It faced a truth it had ignored for centuries. The Empire's retreat was no longer orderly. It became a desperate flight. Fleets that once inspired awe now scattered under constant harassment, their losses mounting not from superior firepower but from exhaustion, sabotage, and relentless human ingenuity. Supply lines were severed, command structures disrupted, and every advance met with a counter that seemed to anticipate every strategy. Ships vanished in orbital ambushes, entire units immobilized by traps improvised from wreckage, and the humans never paused. They did not pursue indiscriminately, but every action was calculated to ensure that no complacency could survive. What the Empire had assumed was chaos was in fact precision executed through intuition, memory, and survival instinct. The veteran watched as his former peers, officers who had dismissed his warnings, struggled to maintain order. Their calculations were meaningless against soldiers who refused to break, who transformed adversity into opportunity. Entire garrisons that should have been annihilated survived and adapted, returning stronger and smarter. Humans did not seek revenge in the alien sense. They sought only to endure, to protect their communities, and to ensure that the invader would pay for every misjudgment. The Empire's technological advantage was rendered secondary to a relentless will that had been honed by centuries of conflict, hardship, and survival. Each human act of resistance left the aliens more bewildered, fearful, and convinced that their own understanding of war was incomplete. attempts at psychological manipulation failed. Humans did not fear propaganda, intimidation, or threats of annihilation. They measured danger, adapted, and countered. When faced with overwhelming force, they retreated strategically, regrouped, and struck where the enemy was weakest. Losses became lessons, and defeats became catalysts for innovation. Even when isolated or outnumbered, they demonstrated patience, exploiting mistakes with precision. Alien commanders began to recognize that humans did not fight for conquest, glory, or obedience. They fought to survive, to preserve what mattered most, and in doing so, created a force that grew stronger with every challenge. By the time the Empire realized the true scale of what they faced, it was too late. Entire fleets had been compromised, ground operations stalled, and morale had collapsed. Humans, though numerically smaller and technologically outmatched in many areas, dictated the pace of engagement. Their unpredictability became a weapon, their endurance a shield, and their collective memory a strategy no computer could replicate. The veterans' warnings were no longer theoretical, they were reality. Every alien officer who had laughed now understood that their assumptions had been fatal, and that underestimating humans was a mistake that could not be undone. The veteran reflected on the broader consequences. Humanity had not sought to dominate the Empire or extend its influence. They had only sought to protect what was theirs, and in doing so, they had rewritten the rules of engagement. The Empire's withdrawal was a tacit acknowledgement of this truth. Humans had not merely survived, they had proven that their will, adaptability, and unity under pressure made them a force that could not be ignored. Alien societies across the galaxy began to reconsider their doctrine. What had once been dismissed as primitive, weak, or uncoordinated was now recognized as dangerous, efficient, and enduring. In the quiet aftermath, the veteran addressed the remaining council one final time. There was no laughter, no dismissal, only understanding, and a long, uneasy silence. He explained that humans had fought not for expansion, not for power, but because they could not do otherwise. They had turned adversity into strategy, weakness into advantage, and resistance into inevitability. The Empire had learned too late that humans were not just soldiers. They were embodiments of endurance, ingenuity, and relentless will. A species that did not need to conquer to command respect, whose mere existence demanded caution, and whose survival instinct made them a force unparalleled in the galaxy. And so the Empire retreated, leaving the humans to their world, their victories uncelebrated but absolute. They had proven, without question, that those who laughed at Earth's soldiers would someday pay for their arrogance. Humanity did not seek war, but when faced with it, they finished it, and no one who witnessed it would ever forget.